History is filled with dark and haunting practices used to enforce societal norms. But few punishments were as brutal or dehumanizing as branding. Imagine being forcibly marked with a hot iron, a scar burned into your skin for life, all because society deemed your choices unacceptable. For centuries, branding was used to punish women accused of prostitution. It wasn't just a physical punishment. It was a social death sentence. These women were turned into walking symbols of shame. Their scars meant to speak louder than any words. Branding has ancient roots, dating back to some of the world's earliest civilizations. In ancient Greece and Rome, branding was used to identify slaves, criminals, and prisoners of war. It served a dual-purpose punishment and permanent identification. A branded person could never escape their past. As societies evolved, this method of punishment extended to women accused of prostitution. The reasoning was chillingly simple: to make their moral failing visible to everyone. Branding wasn't just about discipline. It was about public shaming and control. In many cases, these punishments were carried out in public squares, with crowds gathered to watch. The act wasn't just about marking the woman. It was a spectacle designed to reinforce societal norms and instill fear. During the Middle Ages, branding as a punishment became widespread, especially in Europe. Women accused of being prostitutes were often marked with specific symbols, such as the letter P for prostitute or other stigmatizing signs. These marks were burned into their skin, usually on visible areas like the face, neck, or hands, ensuring they could never hide their past. In England, during the reign of Henry VIII, branding became a codified punishment under law. Women caught in prostitution were branded with the letter P on their foreheads or shoulders. The message was clear: they were outcasts, and society would never let them forget it. But the brutality didn't stop there. Branding wasn't just a punishment. It was a form of social exile. A branded woman often couldn't find work, marry, or reintegrate into her community. Her scar became a constant reminder of her crime and a signal to others to avoid her. Religion played a significant role in enforcing branding as a punishment. In medieval Europe, prostitution was considered a grave sin, and religious authorities often sanctioned harsh penalties to enforce moral order. Ironically, the church itself wasn't always consistent in its stance. While it condemned prostitution and supported branding as punishment, many religious institutions profited from the very act they punished. In some parts of Europe, the church operated brothels, justifying them as a means of controlling immorality. Women who sought to leave these church-run establishments often faced severe punishment, including branding. The practice of branding wasn't limited to Europe. Across the world, different cultures used it as a way to punish and control women accused of prostitution. In colonial America, branding was common for various crimes, including sex work. Women were marked with letters like R for rogue or W for whore. These marks were intended to humiliate and isolate them. In France, women accused of prostitution were often tattooed with a fleur-de-lis, a symbol that signified their outcast status. This method was slightly less visible than traditional branding, but carried the same social stigma. The physical pain of branding was excruciating, but its psychological toll was even greater. A branded woman was marked as an outcast for life. The scar on her skin acted as a constant reminder of her punishment and a signal to society to treat her as less than human. Many branded women were abandoned by their families and communities. They struggled to find work or shelter, often forced back into the very life that led to their punishment. For some, the stigma was so overwhelming that it drove them to isolation or even suicide. Historical accounts tell heartbreaking stories of women trying to hide their scars with clothing, makeup, or even self-inflicted wounds. But no amount of concealment could erase the judgment they faced daily. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the practice of branding began to decline. Enlightenment ideals, which emphasized reason and human dignity, led to a re-evaluation of punishment methods. Branding was increasingly seen as barbaric and counterproductive. Laws banning branding were enacted in many countries, but the scars, both literal and figurative, remained. Even today, the legacy of branding lingers in societal attitudes toward this work. The stigma that once justified such punishments continues to affect how society views and treats women in this industry.